All right. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to join us for join me and the co-hosts here for the next couple of hours. We try to be informative. I also want this to be as conversational as possible. So if you have some questions, post your questions in there. John Hobbins is going to help me out. He's going to answer. He'll interrupt me with some of the questions, and you can raise your hand. Just a quick question for everybody out there. How many of you have some kind of pressure mapping device, whether it be Swing Cat or Science in Motion or GASP or S2M or anything else? Just kind of, I think there's a raise your hand feature or post something in the chat. I'd be interested to see how many of you have something, or how many of you have ever been on a device. And John, if you just let me know, I can't see the chat for some reason, so if you let me know. But before I get going, I just want to thank everybody that's helped out with this. Caitlin and John, thank you for your time for this. I want to thank out the section for all your support and putting together these great educational seminars for all the members of the section. I think it's terrific. I need to thank a few people that have supported me with learning about pressure mapping. Ben Shear, who's been a very close friend from Debbie and myself, and a great resource, and obviously Swing Catalyst and Dr. Scott Lynn, helping me train on the system and learning how things work. And then also Mike Adams, who's taught me a lot about how the body works, who has also worked a lot with Swing Catalyst and Dr. Lynn in this. I've had a pressure plate since 2006. I went to a World Golf Science Congress out in Phoenix and met the Science in Motion guys and was fascinated with the technology. And if anyone knows me, know I'm a techie. And so I bought the plate. Back then it was $9,000 for the plate, and had a system back then. And I really started to see the benefit of how the feet work in the ground and how it affects the swing. When I first got it, I was just kind of experimenting. I didn't know what I was doing with it. But what I did notice was when pressure traces got a little bit cleaner, which I'll show you in a sec, and when things changed, it was amazing to me how the club reacted to it positively, or if something was wrong, the club reacted to it negatively. So it was very interesting on how just by changing how people use their feet, and I was just dealing with pressure at the time, how people change how they use their feet, how it can really affect the swing. We all know your feet are the only connection to the ground, but back then we really didn't know much, or at least I didn't know much about ground reaction force and how that stuff and how pressure mapping can really affect the swing. So that proceeded, and I kind of got into it deeper. And then about 5 years ago, FootJoy got into they wanted to do a shoe fitting system. So they actually had me do some testing. And then I really started to see how actually your shoes can affect your swing. You can, I saw increases of almost 8 miles an hour in club speed just by changing shoes. So I kind of got into the shoe part. I recently just did a study with Swing Cat and Under Armour about it. Kind of saw the same thing. So just a little bit of background with me, as in my history. I've tried different systems. John, how many people have had a system? Does it say
you have three responded, and Karina just ordered her Salted Insoles yesterday.
Oh, so terrific.
3 with 1 coming.
So we'll talk about Salted a little bit towards the end here. So when I'm looking, so I'm going to kind of get into the teaching part. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and fire them out. So my system, I have a 3D Swing Cat system. So there's a pressure plate, which if you look at my screen, you can see my feet on the ground. So that's the pressure plate. And then underneath that, when we hit some shots, you'll see the actual ground reaction force. There's lateral force, which is moving right and left. There's rotational force, which will be a yellow graph, which will highlight twist the ground. And then there's vertical force. We use all 3 forces in golf. and there's a sequence to all three forces, and every good player has the same sequence where it's lateral, torque, and vertical, but they maximize them different, which I'll get into a little bit later. So when I look at a swing, I'm going to actually jump into a student that I had today, who was a new student. So I haven't, actually, he's somebody we just figured out. I've known him since he was 7. This is Will. So when I take a student, I put them on there. I tell them what they're standing on, but I don't tell them what I'm looking for. So just so you know what I'm looking at here. So this in the upper right corner, this is his left foot. This is the right foot. The white dot here is his center of pressure on his left foot. This is the center of pressure on his right foot. And then this big dot in the middle is his actual center of pressure between his feet. And then I look at the trace here. There's been different theories and stories about traces out where maybe, I think back a few years ago, Body Track was saying there's 5 different traces. And actually there's an infinite number of traces because there's an infinite number of golfers. And no one trace is perfect for everybody. But some traces are more efficient than others. When you see a trace that's got a lot of squiggly lines, it's, there's something that to me would be like, if I saw this trace, I'd say, okay, there's something going on. It's not very efficient in his swing. And then I was talking about the pressure. So this is the pressure on the top, and these are the forces that he generates. So just so you kind of get an idea of what I'm looking at, this is his lateral force. Anything above 0 is rightward force. Anything below 0 is leftward force. This graph down here is torque. So imagine trying to twist a plate underneath your feet. This is twisting to the left, and this is twisting to the right. And then the bottom is vertical force. So if you were jumping, this would be trying to jump. These dark areas on here are PGA Tour averages with a driver. So just some basic information that I'm looking at. I'm going to let you watch his swing here for a sec. This is a 6-iron. He was a pretty good player. I don't believe he played at Georgetown. He may have played at Georgetown. A strong player. Obviously didn't like the shot that he hit. And so when I go into a player here, so what I'm going to, couple of things that I didn't like was when you're looking at pressure, I always start with where's their balance at address. And I like to see the balance a little bit towards the balls of the feet. So this dark blue area here is kind of the edge of where the arch of your foot meets the ball of your foot. And that's where I like to see pressure start. Some players will get too much onto their toes. You'll see this white dot way out here, and some will get back into their heels too much. And then I also look at the percentage of pressure on the left versus right. And this number here in the middle is the distance between these 2 white dots. And typically with players, it's about 15 to 17 inches apart is what I look for. And then as we go back, there's a couple of checkpoints. So where is maximum pressure in the backswing? So for Will, maximum pressure is about right here, which is a little bit late in my mind. I like to see maximum pressure somewhere around left arm parallel. So he's actually there. So he's kind of holding on to it there a little bit. So it's not too bad. And then when does the pressure change direction is important. So Will, he gets back, he gets to the top of his swing, his pressure still hasn't changed. And then now as his body starts to go left, his pressure changes. So for me, that's a little bit late. Think about this. If you were going to throw a club, and everyone's probably wanted to toss a club down the fairway and probably has done it in the past, but when you throw a club, as the club's going back, you're moving forward. So you're changing pressure from right to left as this goes back. And that's kind of the sequence that you want to have. We're all trying to get the club to shallow out or get our students to swing less out to in. So if the pressure changes late, most players are going to start a little bit this way because their legs are late, so they take over with their upper body. If the pressure starts a little bit earlier, you can see how when I do that, the club tends to shallow out a little bit. And so Will was struggling with his path going a little bit too far to the left, about 6 degrees. And then he also closed the face. He was hitting pull hooks. And the pull hook part, if I go back to Will here, was as he starts down, you can see how he starts with his upper body. His head actually goes forward a little bit. So I'm going to illustrate that with you here. So watch how his head reacts. So he goes back nicely, transitions late. His head goes forward with the club, and then now he's going to try to square the face up and shallow out. See how his head goes backwards? And that's why the trace looks like this. So there's two reasons why I see this kind of a trace. One is what we're seeing here, is he's trying to back up to do something to either shallow out the club or to square the face up, or both. The other reason is you see a lot of power hitters. They'll do that because when your head drops back, it actually helps accelerate the club forward. So let me show you what that looks like live. So if my upper body goes back this way, it really helps me accelerate the club this way. So if you want to really learn how to swing faster, disregarding direction, if you get your head to go back, your arms will actually accelerate. And I kind of figured that out a long time ago. I was down at Doral, where I worked for 25 years, and Mike Lopazinski, who was down there, who played at Duke and was a great teacher and a great player. We had one of the first machines that measured speed, and we'd always have speed competitions. And Mike figured out that if he dropped his head back, his club speed went from 117 to 122. This was back in the mid 90s, and that's how, that was pretty interesting. So we just kind of happened to figure it out. Now we can actually measure it. So this is what was going on with Will. So for me as a coach, okay, his head's going back, but there's a reason why. I don't think he's doing it in reaction to something. That's not the fault. So I'm not going to fix that. If you pay closer attention to Will's feet, watch his right foot in his backswing. As he goes back, watch what his right foot does right there. See how it rolls out? And if you look at his pressure trace, he's on the outside of his right foot. So at address, you can see kind of the width of his foot there, of the ball of his foot. And when he goes back, it gets narrow and he's on the outside. And we all know we can't push off of the outside of our foot. So how does our body react? Well, it's going to lean. Okay, so now he leaned forward to get the momentum to change. The club gets heavy when you swing it. Someone who's a lot smarter than me told me to find the weight of an object in motion. You take the weight of the object, so a golf club weighs a pound or just under a pound. You multiply it by the speed. So he's swinging at 90 miles an hour. Let's say in his backswing he's going 60 miles an hour. And you multiply that by, we're going to round up to 1.5. So it's 60 times 1.5. So that club weighs 90 pounds. Imagine trying to take a 90-pound weight at the top of your backswing up here and change directions with it without being stable on your feet. Very hard to do. So he's going to use his body to change, his upper body to lean. And then now, being a good athlete, he's like, well, now he's got to control the face and the path. So he kind of figures out a way to do it, not very successfully, because the ball kind of goes all over the place. He hits it left and right because he doesn't want to hit it left anymore, so he hits it to the right. Does anybody have any questions about what we're seeing there? If they do, maybe John or Caitlin, we can unmute them and ask their question, or if they posted a question,
Yes.
let me know.
Monique wanted to know what he does. What does he test out for the post?
He's a center post. For those of you who don't know what that means, so Mike Adams, E.A. Tischler have a system that they developed called Bioswing Dynamics, and they take an anthropomorphic measurement of everybody, and we're all predisposed to move a certain way. You have two posts. You have your right leg and your left leg. And then there's a center post, which is in the center and everywhere in between. So we test people. Mike has people testing where they turn this way. You can see how when I do it, I'm a center post golfer. Some golfers will turn and they'll actually go a little bit left, and some golfers will go into their right. I actually use the plate also to measure that, where I have them swing on the left side, the right side, and the center. and see how much torque they go. So that's how we're predisposed to move. It doesn't mean you have to move that way, but it's typically a lot easier for people to move the way they're kind of designed to. So he's a center post. So Will, if you watch his backswing here, he actually does it very well. So I'm looking at his pelvis at address. I draw some lines around him here. His balance is very good. He's 50-50. So Will's access point or his pivot point is the center of his pelvis. So when he turns back, you'll notice how he stays very centered. So he does that well. For some players, they sway too much. They would, if he's a center post, but he created a gap between his left hip and this line here, that would put him into his right side. That would make it a little bit harder for him to be efficient in his swing. In my mind, he'd be overloading his right side. So he'd have to shift back to the left, which delays his rotation. When you look at the plate here and the way the body moves, if you're a rear post golfer, you're going to turn into your right side. So you're going to get almost 90% of your pressure into your right side, and your weight's going to go there. And there's a difference between moving weight and moving pressure. Moving weight is if I took the center of my mass and I move it to the right, that's moving weight and pressure. You can see it, the upper right there, I've got 75% on my right side. Moving pressure is if I kept the center of my mass relatively centered and I push down on my right foot. So if I do that, you can see how the pressure goes up. It's hard for me to sustain it, but you can see how the pressure spikes up a little bit, but my mass isn't moving over. So center post golfers will put a little less pressure on their right side because their mass isn't moving over there, somewhere between 70 and 80%, maybe 85 for the stronger players. And then front post golfers will have the least amount. They'll look a little bit like this, and they could almost be 50-50 to maybe 65% on their right. And if you ever want to check yourself, you can try this. Just look in the mirror, put your club across your knees like this, and just kind of turn your pelvis back. Make sure you don't straighten up your right leg when you do it. Just kind of rotate a little, and then you'll kind of see where your hips go. It's a good way. I don't think it's the most efficient way to do it. Ben Shearer showed me some other ways. One of the ways is using the plate to measure how people move their feet. Hope that answers your question a little bit about that.
Thank you.
John, anything else?
Yes. So when you see the data, you've done your diagnosis, then what would your next steps be relative to helping this individual? And would you use the swing catalyst for explanation to him?
Yeah, so that's kind of what we did here. So in talking with Will, we talked about, everything really looked pretty good, except for I didn't like how he was using his feet. So we talked about bracing against the inside of his right foot in his backswing. So this swing here where his posture was pretty good. He started a little bit on his toes. So I had him push his hips back. You can see how his center of pressure moved a little bit more into the middle of his feet. We also discussed his shoes, which he's wearing more of a sneaker type of a shoe that's very mobile. And when you get a very mobile shoe and a foot that's also very mobile, it's not a great combination. So that's one of the reasons why he was rolling out on his foot. So we talked about, he doesn't really play in these shoes. He uses an Adidas Tour 360 shoe, which is a much more rigid shoe. And that helped him support it, but we didn't have him. So we talked about bracing into his right foot going back. So if you watch his right foot here, when he goes back, see how much is much less movement in his foot. Here I can see on the pressure plate, it's a much wider pressure mapping of his foot there. So he was much more stable with that. And he was actually able to feel his pressure. You can actually see his pressure now started to change a little bit sooner. One of these is a practice swing. And in his practice swing, you can really see how his pressure trace really cleaned up. So now watch his right foot when he goes back. He braces against it better. Now he's able to push off. Watch how much earlier. So if you can watch the front view picture and his pressure trace at the same time, you can see his pressure goes to the left now and the club's still going back. That to me is a more athletic or dynamic way of changing pressure. And that's, the image I gave him was throwing a club, but I gave him a better support system to do it. And that's what really triggered with him as far as making the feel. And he even said that's something very simple for him to feel and very tangible, something that he can key on. And quite honestly, now he doesn't have a swing cat, so he can actually use a video or a mirror because he can kind of watch his foot. And I'll get into later a little bit, a device that people can get that's less expensive than a swing cat, but it shows pressure and it's highly active or highly accurate. So John, that was the change that we made. And in doing so, one of the things I noticed was his hands now shallowed out a little bit. Instead of going above that yellow line, they started to come under the yellow line. And his swing path started to change a little bit. It was going less to the left. His swing direction was way less to the left. His head hung back a little bit less, which you can see here in the trace. There's a little less of the hang back. Obviously, it's a practice swing, so there's going to be less speed. It's not going to do as much. And I don't think I filmed it, but the first couple of swings, he actually fell forward, almost fell off of my platform here. So it was a very different feeling for his body to go through. Let me see if I think I may even have one where he fell. He almost fell forward.
And then, Sprecher, as a follow-up to that, you see some head movement there on his backswing. Do you feel that has anything to do with his balance going to the outside of his foot?
It could, but it didn't, because he has a little bit of a counter turn the way his body moves. Right. So it wasn't moving too much to where it was getting to the outside. I don't see, let me go live here for a sec. I typically see people get to the outside of their trail leg, not so much because they do this, as more than it is more of a hip motion. So when I see a player that's doing this, it's more of just a counter move to their hip turn. That's the way their body works. I don't, if they end up moving their head way over there, well, their hips tend to go with them, and the problem's still the hips. I think that's a lower body issue that's going on, not so much of an upper body issue. Because when you look, I'm going to talk a little bit about ground force. When you look at a player's ground force, so this graph here, so this graph, he's pushing off of his left side here, so in his backswing. So here he pushes off of his left leg, which moves his body to the right. And then right in here, he starts to push against his right side so he doesn't keep swaying. If you don't see this increase in pressure, that's where you typically see a little too much lateral or sway. And I'll show you another player who does that. And then just to kind of continue on my thought here, at this point, somewhere in here, the bracing now becomes, okay, now he's got to change direction. And this is where he really starts to push off right there. And that's him trying to change his body direction. So your right leg works in a dual function, one, to stop you from swaying, and two, to get you to start going the other way.
And he appears to have some space there on his right hip. You can see your clubs in the background.
Yep.
And that helps keep him centered.
Yeah, that's his hips. That's his hips turning. Oh, there's an echo there. That's his hips turning. Your hips, they either, your body can only move a few ways. Right. If you can sway with your hip, lateral, they call it translation. You can rotate and you can kind of lift. There's thrust and bending and the other things, but if you use the ground correctly, if you push down on your right foot, and this is something that Scott Lynn showed me, for players who sway too much, I find it's because they're not pushing their foot that way. When you try to push the ground this way, right, but there's friction on the ground, your hip reacts by going backwards. Here's a way to illustrate that.
And you're talking about your takeaway.
Your takeaway, or anything as far as the ground goes. If I put, this is just a little furniture slider. If I put my right foot on there in my backswing, if I do this, my foot's going to slide forward, right? So that way it makes it hard for me to turn if my foot's sliding forward because there's no friction. So if I add a little bit of friction, that my foot's going to try to move that way, but I add friction. So now my hip's going to move backwards. Does that make sense to everybody? Another way to think about it is if I were going to try to push this if I stood here, you can see this better. If I try to push forward with this, my hip goes that way. There's something stopping me from going there. So that's what the friction on the ground is. I'm sure you guys seen the video of the guy swinging on ice, where as he goes back, his foot slips and he kind of falls through the ice on his downswing. So on your downswing, your foot actually pushes back so your hip can go forward. Does that make sense, John?
Yeah, yes, because you have a reaction force basically.
Right. So, it's Newton's law, equal and opposite reaction. If I push down, the ground pushes back up. That's the vertical force. If I push this way, well, the ground's going to push me back that way. So obviously we're always pushing down, but there's also a little bit of an angular movement to it as well. And that's what helps your body to move. And for some players, everyone can do it. They just don't know that they can do it. They haven't been trained to do it. So I use a device. So I use this device. You guys have probably seen this. I'll go here. This is just a Reebok core board, and it's hard to get. And this is something that I'll put people on to train them how to move. So if anyone's TPI certified or are familiar with TPI, one of their tests is, can you freeze your legs, separate your upper? Can you freeze your upper and separate your lower? Well, that to me is kind of a litmus test for a player. Are they able to control their body? More importantly, are they able to use the ground to control their body? So you get people and they kind of go like this when they try to do it, or they can't move at all. So I like to use this core board here to help train people to do that, where I get them on here and I'll show them if I can do this and get my feet if I can twist the board. And I've had some of you out there on the board, and it's pretty interesting to see. They get on here and all of a sudden they freeze. So like they can't move. That they can, they'll either won't move, or they'll start to go like this, or you'll see their shoulders move. And it's not that they can't do it, they haven't been trained to do it. So I'll get them first to learn to go right and left. So here's moving laterally. I push down right, push down left, and they kind of feel that. I make sure they don't lean, because I don't want them to use their upper body. I want to push down on your right side, push down on your left side. So I get them to do that. Then I'll have them go toe to heel a little bit. And then what I'll do is I'll actually hold their upper body and which helps brace them. And then they can start to get a little bit of motion there. And then eventually they get to this. When I get somebody who's on here like this, I know they know how to use their feet. And then that translates into going onto the plate here, because now the plate's not going to move. They try to get that same motion. Now their body starts to twist this way. And I'm really, one of the forces, if you look at these force graphs again, one of the forces that I'm very interested in is rotational force, because 85% of your power is coming from rotation and about 15% from lateral. And that's really doesn't matter how you test out left, center, or right post. So if we can get this graph to get a little bit higher, so as he starts to play, let's see if we go to a swing here. Here we were just working on, this was one of the last swings where he was just really bracing. So you can see his right foot, he really braces better. This was about a half speed swing, which is why the forces went down a little bit. But we really try to get this rotation going to help generate speed. So any other questions about Will or anything else we've talked about?
Yes, we have some backing up here. So Cody wanted to know if you would identify that board and maker again.
So the board, it's a Reebok core board.
Reebok core board.
I don't think they're in production anymore. I actually had to buy mine off of eBay.
I did
I haven't
as well.
seen them around. So that's the core board. Or yeah, there's a couple of other things out there. One of the things that I will use is I found this device. This is it's a swing swivel disc. Oop, you can't see me. Let me put me on live. Let me go live here. So I've got this little thing here which has ball bearings in it, which you kind of have to be careful with when you get on it, because it's really twisty. Let me put it up here. So this thing, really gets people to get going. So this makes it really easy. I'll put people on that. And then what I find is just to kind of get people going is I'll take a plastic lie board and put it on the ground. I'm on a mat, I'm on my carpet here, and have them try to twist it. And that's just something easy that they can get for home. But these sliders are pretty good. You can get a big slider, just something that's easy that kind of slides on the ground to teach them how to twist. You probably get something at Home Depot pretty cheap. You don't need to get something like that.
And Sprecher, did you find with your pressure traces, is there a direct relationship with the pressure trace and the path that the club takes? Which Mike Bello had an interest in.
Yeah, yes. So typically, let me pull up this guy. So this guy's pressure trace, he goes towards his toes. If you watch his first swing, watch where he's going there. So typically when you start, Mike, I'm gonna answer it this way. When you start going towards your toes, you can see how the club starts going outward.
And steeply.
And it gets very steep. Let me make sure that's the right swing. 1153, 1156. Yeah. So he gets very steep on his toes. And so he was somebody that we worked on trying to change the direction of his trace, because he would go on his toes, he'd get very steep. And this is actually pretty good for him. And then I'm going to skip a few to the end here. You can see how the trace started to flatten out a little bit. But watch how he got the club to change direction. So it's still going towards his toes, but a little bit less. And he's trying to straighten up his left leg so his left hip can go behind him, which helps shallow out the swing. So this was about a 20-minute, lots of practice swings, 20 minutes of discussion, and he really started to get the club. You can see how he changed direction. And that's all we worked on. I didn't tell him to swing more to the right. I didn't tell him to shallow it out. We just worked on how he used his feet differently with his pressure, because he'd just get too toe heavy. Right there, he's got just way too much pressure on his left toe, and then it never really. So if you look at his trace, it never really goes into his heel. Right, it's still on his toe. It's still on his toe. It's still on his toe, and it's still on his toe. You don't really see his heel. Where on this one, now you can see his heel. So he went towards toe, and then he got into his heel a little bit more, which you can see down there. And as we progressed, he finally got it more into his heel. So by changing the direction of the trace, by using his hips better, he was able to shallow out the club. We did this in one session. Unfortunately for him, it didn't stick. Fortunately for me, he had to keep coming back and working on it. But so that was a great question, Mike, about about the angle, where the pressure trace is going and how it can affect the way the club swings.
All right, Mike, we're going to expect a couple more victories this season with that information.
Yeah.
Hey, Sprecher,
Yep.
Are there different forces for different posts?
So the answer is there's different magnitudes, and some posts will maximize in certain ones. So if you look at this player, he's kind of maximizing in all three. He's a center post. Typically a right post golfer, so someone who moves into the right leg, will maximize in lateral force. Makes sense, because you're trying, the more you move to the right, the more you got to move to the left. So they'll maximize in lateral. Their next greatest will be torque, rotation, and their least, lateral players typically have less vertical. Center post golfers typically have a little less horizontal, more rotation and more vertical, and front post golfers will have the least amount of lateral and the most amount of vertical, with torque being kind of third in there.
So
and there's some players will maximize it all three.
Identifying post is very critical to your use of the catalyst.
Yes. Yeah. Finding out which leg they want to, which leg they benefit from. I also do a test. Ben Shear has a resistor releaser test, which, think of it as like Phil Mickelson's a releaser, kind of a long, really long swing. he's a releaser, where J-Day is going to be more of a resistor. That also has a lot to do with your legs and how much force you're going to generate. And then you can actually narrow that down even more to which leg are they best off of. So like for me, when I measure on the plate, I'll measure people. I don't know, I don't have it pulled up, but I'll have them stand so they're center of the plates on either side of their feet. So they have to use both feet to generate torque. Then I'll put their trail leg in the center of the plate, so they can only use their lead leg, my left leg, to generate torque. And then I'll go to the right leg. Here, I'll actually demonstrate this. You'll see this because it might be helpful to see. So I'm going to hit a shot here. We'll let that process, and then I'll hit 3 shots. So I'll have them go to either side of the plate. Let me let that reset. And figuring out which leg that they can generate the most torque with is very helpful. And it'll help you determine how their hips are going to move in the backswing. So that would be my left side generating torque. And then here's my right side. And you'll see, hopefully you'll see a difference in how much torque I generate. Okay. So let me show you those 3 graphs. And this is part of the assessment that I do with all of my players. It's about a 10-minute assessment. I take anthropomorphic measurements to see how their bodies are designed to move. And then I also do this to see how they use their feet. So this is me standing in the middle of the plate. So I generated a 0.98 torque, 73 pounds of torque. Then I went to the left side and I went to 1.1, so just a little bit more torque. And then I go to my right side and it went way down. So for me to load into my right side would not be good. It's hard for me to push off and turn off of that. So I would be considered a center to a front post golfer based upon these numbers, because my center and front were about the same. I've been through Ben's test and I'm a left leg dominant. So this is a much easier motion for me this way than it is for me to push off of this. And I don't generate a lot of rotation. I have slow hips. So for me, I need vertical force. I need more vertical. So I work on this move, because when I push off my right and I go vertical and I brace against my left, that helps me to rotate. So I'm constantly working on, for myself, trying to learn how to do this move. And a great drill for somebody who tends to slide too much or doesn't use their left leg very well is I like to have them hit balls like this, because now they can't go lateral and they have to learn how to post up or straighten up their leg. And I can hit balls really well just on my left leg. And I hit it pretty solidly doing that. If I go onto my right side, we'll let this cycle through. You can see I don't look too bad doing that. When I do it on my right leg, so if I did right leg only, and this is another way to test people's leg dominance. It's not great because not everyone's used to hitting balls on one leg or the other, so which I find is a good exercise for people. But when I go my right leg only, I lose my balance a little bit. I lose speed, and it's a little harder for me. I don't feel as stable. You can see I kind of lose. I don't look as good doing it. So that's another way to tell if a player what leg that they're good with. And then if they're center post, you can actually put their feet together this way and have them hit a shot. Scott Lynn will use a launch monitor and have them hit balls on one foot versus the other to see which way they generate speed. You just have to be careful with that test, because a lot of people aren't used to balancing on one leg versus the other. But it's a great exercise for people to learn how to do. And then when I do some of my junior camps and my junior clinics, I put them on there, and that's one of the exercises I have them do. Hit balls on their front leg, hit balls on their back leg, and go center, and let them do it for a while. And you'll start to see which leg, whether it's be right leg, left leg, or center, that they're the most consistent with. And then I kind of run with that. If I find that they're better with both feet down, then I'm gonna make them a little bit more of a center post. If I'm ever unsure, if it's hard for me to determine which it is, I'm gonna kind of default to center. it's hard to go wrong with center, because they still have to load into their right leg a little bit, and they can go through, and then through a series of trials and errors, you kind of figure out if they're more rear or front post.
Great, thank you very much. What about the Shaftic pressure board? You're familiar with that, obviously.
Yeah.
Are you able to hit balls off of that? What do you think of that
Got
idea?
one right here. So
there you go.
Yeah,
should have known.
You can hit balls on it, and actually, it was interesting. I was talking to Mark when I first got it, because I kept noticing when I went, it would twist a lot, and that's the Shaftic board is great for golfers who need more lateral. It makes you go right and left, but if you need more rotation, then it's going to start to twist, which is what was happening with me. It was hard for me to use it. And then I also learned that, for players who have too much lateral, if I get them to kind of keep the left side down, that way, and it stopped some lateral motion. Now the problem is they were leaning on their left side too much. So you have to, I use it to teach people, okay, so push down on your right side, push the right foot down, but don't use your hips to do it. So it's a great device to learn how to pump your feet on the ground without moving your hips too far right and left. And it's also great for helping you move right and left, which, I measure all of my students, and, it's great that we have all these systems and they're supposed to swing a certain way, but sometimes people's bodies, I was talking with Debbie about this last night, their bodies just aren't going to move the way you want it to move. And you have, they might be a front post golfer and they're supposed to turn, but he's got two replaced hips, his upper body's tight and can't move. So when you can't rotate, you got to have a little bit more lateral motion. So you can use, the Shaftic board like that to help train people to do it. And those are the people that they need to understand that they're just never going to be great because of their body limitations. We can teach them how to be better, but because they can't move for whatever physical reasons, they can't move the way their body wants to, they're going to have compensations in their swing for that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but you're giving them hope.
Yeah, that's we're just trying to sprinkle a little bit of hope. But as my sign on the above my mirror says, there's no miracles today.
No miracles today
for some of those people.
Now,
any other questions?
Yes, a couple more here. You had mentioned earlier on that you've done some testing with shoes. Do you find certain shoes to be more beneficial than others for performance?
I'm not going to say certain brands, but certain types of shoes. So there are some shoes. Let me go grab a couple shoes. Hang tight. So when you talk about shoes, we're talking about the stability of a shoe and the mobility of a shoe. So this is the FootJoy Flex, right? You got no plastic in the sole. I can twist it. Very mobile shoe. Great for teaching in. It's a very mobile shoe. So if you have a foot that has a really high arch or your foot's very rigid, this is a good shoe for you because it's going to provide a little bit of movement. If you're flat-footed, it's terrible. And if you have just an average foot, it's not that great because it's not going to produce a lot of support. Kind of like we saw with my first student, Will. He had a shoe that was similar to this and the shoe was giving out. Then you've got a shoe like I'm wearing, the FootJoy, the Pro SL, a little bit more rigid than the Flex. So it's kind of a medium shoe, provides a little bit more support. And then you go into more of the Tour X or the Tour S, where it's very rigid. You can actually see the sole's got a lot of plastic. So this would be a more rigid shoe. This is what I wear because I need stability for my feet. I've got weak ankles and my feet tend to move around. So I play in this shoe. When I did testing, most people that wear shoes, they buy them for what? Comfort, right? If you sell a lot of golf shoes, they're like, especially last year because everybody was walking so much. They bought the most comfortable shoe out there, but the problem is you're going to sacrifice performance. In my opinion, your shoes are the most undervalued piece of equipment in your bag. Look, you get fitted for your ball, you get fitted for your clubs, your irons, whatever. You buy a glove that fits perfectly, but you buy a shoe because of the way it feels, it's comfort. But we need to, if you're really into it, you want to get a shoe that fits your foot properly. So I probably sell 50 pairs of shoes a year because they come in with these, either the shoes are worn down where the last is really close and they're broken down, or it's just the wrong type of shoe. So if you can provide your students, I have got the indoor placers that they can bring a couple of different pairs of shoes. We can test them out, and then they can bring back the other 2 pairs without damaging them, so we can test them. That would be the ultimate way to fit a shoe, which is why I was hoping FootJoy was going to come out with that system a few years ago. They just couldn't get it to figure out. That answer your question?
Yes, that was very good. Thank you. And if you ever have a garage sale at the Academy, I want advance notice. I'll save my money and be over early. There's not anything that Kevin Sprecher does not have. Now, you mentioned Debbie earlier. Okay, very very knowledgeable, very very fit, very good player. With somebody like Debbie, who's certainly on the higher end of players, do you see certain pressure traces with somebody like her because of her size and her athletic abilities? Or do you see and then going down the line, do you see different traces with women and men?
So if you showed me a bunch of traces, I couldn't tell you if it was a man or a woman. I couldn't tell you how tall they were or how much they weighed. I could tell you if their trace looked good. So let me pull up a college player that I've worked with. This kid plays at Princeton, and so this is Connor. So you can see his forces here. So if you saw this pressure trace, kind of bounces back all around. This is something we worked on with him. He had a little bit of, he generates a tremendous amount of force, swings a 7-iron about 100 miles an hour. He's very young, and we've worked hard on his pressure trace, trying to clean it up a little bit. You can see here, it got a little bit cleaner in this one. And so typically players who move more, have a little bit more efficient motion, will have a little cleaner trace. You can look at, this is Justin Rose. So here's a player, he moves quite a bit to the right, right? So he kind of loads into his right side. He transitions early. See how linear his trace from his right foot to his left foot is? So that's a pretty efficient movement right there.
Which is why he's Justin Rose, huh?
Right. If you watch his left foot, you'll notice how it spins around a little bit. And I actually don't mind when the foot turns out like that. Notice how his left toe is turning out. That's okay. What's bad is if you get players, when they swing and their lead heel turns in, that's a bad movement. That means there's no pressure on the ball of on the heel of their foot. It's on the ball of their foot. And when the pressure gets on the ball of your foot, you tend to see this kind of a downswing move. You tend to see that. When a player gets into their heel and they shift forward properly, they get into their heel, when they go through, their foot spins out. That's fine. That's typically because there's some kind of structural issue with the ankle or the knee, or probably the ankle or the hip, because that's, in the mobility stability chain that TPI talks about, the foot should be stable, the ankle should be mobile, the knee should be stable, the hip should be mobile. Well, if the ankle's got it's gummed up or something, well, then the foot's going to spin out a little bit to give way or something like that. Or, what the players that we see a lot of knee sag. When they go through, you see a lot of this motion because they're either not stable in their leg, or typically their glutes are weak. So they can't support that kind of motion. So the answer is you typically see traces. Let me see if I've got a power hitter here. If you look at, you typically see players who tend to hit it very straight tend to have a more linear trace. And players who tend to generate more power tend to have that kind of a fish hook where they kind of go from the right foot towards their left toe and then back around. They tend to have a little bit more of that kind of a trace. Let me see if Connor, let's see if I can think of somebody else that I have that does that. I've got Connor hitting a driver here somewhere. This kid absolutely mashes the ball. No, I don't have him hitting a driver, but it's an impressive. He swings at about 125 when he was. This was in high school back then. Here we're working on. This is backswing. So the answer is yes. You can. Certain traces, like I said, more linear traces tend to be a little bit straighter, and more arcing traces, and one that has a little bit of a hang back to it tend to be a little bit more powerful.
Which would be more of your long drive company.
Your long drive guys, because they go up on their toes a little bit. If you talk to the TPI guys, as far as power goes, they've got 7 different things that that you see power hitters do. One of them is a jumping move. They go on their toes, or they're pushing off or lifting up their feet. There's a lot of different things that you can do to generate power like that.
Okay, we got a lot of questions here. Everybody's interested. That's good.
Okay.
Thank you for the questions.
Yeah.
All right. So we're gonna tire Sprecher out here. Okay, is there any information taken into consideration for people with physical disabilities? ? Meaning a lot of tour pros were put on this, and it appears that the normal is based on tour pros. But are people with disabilities put on this and the average golfer, so teachers can compare their students to other people of similar ability? So I guess you hold on to all these traces. You have obviously a library of them.
Yes.
And then do you use those for comparisons?
I don't
if you get somebody similar.
I don't use them for comparisons because I treat everybody as an individual, and I know, because I measure everyone. Some people are tight here, tight there. They've got shoulder surgeries and whatever. So we all have to make a compensation for it. I do know, as far as the force generation goes, regardless of injury or no injury, the sequencing of it. So if you look at this guy here, if I pull him up, you look at, these are nice shaped. He's a good player. These are nice shaped forces. If I had a player who was injured, they might not have the same magnitude. So these peaks might not be as high, which is fine. But as long as they're in the same sequencing, so it goes lateral, torque, and vertical, that's fine. It might be someone like this guy here. Another guy here. Where is he? This guy's not going to have the same magnitude in some of the areas. So I like to treat everybody as an individual, and if they just can't generate any force, I wish I saved this guy I had yesterday. Let me see if I have it here.
But they're going to create compensations due to what their body can do, correct?
They're going to have compensations based upon what their body can do, and so we just have to kind of learn to work within what they can and can't do
with what they bring.
Yep.
Interesting.
So Ben always taught me N equals 1. N is the individual, and we teach them 1. So this guy, here's a perfect example of a guy. He's really tight in his upper body, broad chested. You can see he generates very little rotational force, or very little vertical force. So, and because he can't turn very well, we worked on with him trying to increase his lateral, so you can see him move right and left, which then also helped him generate some more rotation.
And
but he's not very vertical. His speed went from, he was swinging in the low 70s. I don't know what this is here. We got him up to 75.6, and he was like 72 or 71 when we started.
So there's good 10, 12 yards.
So he was, and he felt better. He felt like he had some movement, but he tested out to be more of a center golfer. So he needs more rotation, but he just couldn't do it because of the way he's built. So we went more lateral, And so, like I said before, the more lateral you get, the less vertical you tend to get. There's no guarantees on anything. Everything's on the table with that.
Right.
Because like I showed you with this last guy, this guy I had this morning, Mike Geller, he's got good lateral and he's got good rotation and he's got good torque, or I'm sorry, good vertical. And as we we worked with him, I did an interesting thing with him this day. We were talking about stance width. He came to me and he was standing very close together with his feet. He was actually at 9 inches. And I said, okay, well, let's test this and see what we can, where the best is for you. So if you notice, his vertical is 160, and when he's at 11 inches, and then we go a little bit wider. This was supposed to be 13 inches. His vertical went up a little bit. His lateral didn't change. Then we went to 15, and all of a sudden he didn't really change too much. And then we go here to 17 inches, and wow, okay, so his vertical starting to show a change. His lateral starting to show a change. We actually saw an increase in speed. And then we went to 19 inches, and he got the most vertical, more lateral. His torque got a little bit better. This is all with a 7-iron. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So his speed started to jump up. If you look at this swing, he swung at 85 miles an hour. When he was at 15, he was at 83. At 13, he was at 83. 83 with 11, and then 82 with, or 83 with 13 and 15 and 82 here. So we ended up going a little bit wider with his stance because he generated more ground force, generated more club speed, and his smash factor started to get a little bit better. And so we ended up keeping him around 16 inches and working on that. And here's a guy with a pretty good looking trace. If you watch his feet here, he's got good footwork. He loads into the right and goes left. And what he gets a little bit off with is his pressure changes a little bit too late. So that's something that he needs to work on, is getting his pressure to go a little bit earlier.
Which is probably very common, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not an uncommon thing. Like here we're working on, notice I was, this is where we're working on his pressure changing a little bit sooner. He's still doing it, or no, these were 5-irons, I believe.
So that's very interesting that you basically, you didn't have a solution other than you knew you had to figure out a solution. I think that's good information, and especially if you haven't taught a lot, is like people come to us and they're always looking for solutions. And one of my favorite expressions is, I'll tell you once we have it, because a lot of determining a solution for a player is experimenting with different ideas. And if it's not working, what do you do, Kevin? You move on? You have to, you have to try something that works. If it doesn't work, try it another way. Or I may not be saying it the way that they can understand it. So, one of the things that one of my mentors, Jim McLean, taught me is to learn how to say things 10 different ways. When I got my first club job at Glen Oaks in 1995, Jim sat me down and he goes, look, Sprecher, he goes, you're going to see 10 slicers a day up there. He goes, you need to find 10 different ways to teach them. So you don't get bored, and 2, you learn how to teach a little bit better. And I thought that was some great advice for me, being a young teacher, kind of going out there. And I tell that to everyone that I go to, you need to be able to say something differently to someone so they can learn, so they can kind of digest it and put it into their system. Because if I tell someone just to shift right and left, they might look at me like with a blank stare. I don't get that. But like with Will, I had this morning, I said, okay, let's brace on the inside of your right foot and go back. And as soon as I said that, it clicked, and he got it, and he was able to go run with it. And now I know he's got something that he can go practice with a tangible feel and then come back to me with. That being said, I try to use more of an external cue with my students. I've spent a lot of time talking with Dr. Will Wu, who's a motor learning specialist out in California. And through his research and his stuff, they've learned that most of what
people can learn is through something external. So if I tell them that about his shoe, brace on the inside of your shoe. I try not to use the word foot. Think of the buttons of your shirt turning back instead of your sternum. Those are external cues, things like that. It tends to speed up the learning process with people.
That's good information. And it's interesting that you talked about stance width, because you just worked your way right into the next question, which was, do you find that there are ideal stance width ranges for gliders, spinners, and launchers?
Yes. Typically, the more lateral or gliding you're going to do, you're going to have a little bit wider of a stance. Spinners are going to tend to be slightly narrower, and launchers are going to be even a little bit narrower. Again, there's no absolute with that. Like I saw with Mike Geller, that one guy, he's more of a center post guy, but he does better when he has a little bit more glide because he's slow with his hip rotation.
Right.
So slower hip rotations, I give him a little bit more lateral, and he's able to rotate. And then the position of your feet are also very important, especially your front foot. The more you turn your lead foot out, the less vertical you're going to get, and the more rotational you're going to get. So if you look at a player's vertical force, okay, so here's his vertical force, and the timing of the vertical force should be about when the hands are about hip height. Okay, so his vertical force is very early here. So we would turn his foot out, which would tend to make the vertical a little bit later. If you turn the foot in, the vertical tends to go a little bit sooner. So it's a balancing act between, okay, do I need more of this, more vertical? Do I need more rotation? And we can adjust the feet. Then you also have to balance out, like the person asked about injuries or just inability to move. Well, if I turn my toes out, that gives me a greater range of motion in my hips. Okay, well, is that good? Well, it is for somebody. If I turn, most players, they like to get their toes straight, but nobody stands this way. Ben Shear showed me that a great way to learn how people's feet stand naturally is you have them jump and then you land. So here's my natural foot. My right foot turns out a little bit more than my left. And actually, that's how I play golf, because I need more vertical. So I tend to turn my left foot in, but I need a little bit of help turning back. So my right foot turned out a little bit. So this helps me get a little bit more hip rotation, which gives me the ability to turn my shoulders more. And then by having my left foot turned in, it makes it easier for me to post up. So you can play around with stance width, get really wide if they need more lateral, but you have to be careful because the wider you get, if they're not very flexible, they lose the ability to turn. You can get really narrow, but then you lose some of the ability to move laterally, but it's easier to rotate. And I tell a lot of my tournament players, or anybody who's playing golf, really, if you're struggling, get a little bit narrower, just rotate and hit shots. Typically, people won't lose that much distance when they get rid of some of the lateral, because, like I said before, most of your power comes from rotation. So if you can get them to rotate better, they tend to not lose so much distance. They tend to make more solid contact more often, and they hit it a little bit straighter. When they start getting lateral, they lose some of the rotation. And when people don't rotate, their hands either flip over and they hit it left, or they slide in front and they break down, all these bad things that we see. But if you get them narrower, those things typically tend to I'm not going to say go away, but they get minimized. So now they're able to turn better. When you can turn better, your arms are able to extend. Everyone fights, you always see players going through like this, but the problem isn't that the elbow's bending. They'll try to straighten out their arms. The problem is their chest isn't turning. So if I can get someone's chest to rotate, their arms are going to extend better, which is going to help square up the face. And then I take it back another step. Well, why can't they turn their chest? And it's usually something to do with their legs. It always comes back to what's going on with the ground. If the feet are good and the legs are working, and then I start working on, okay, well, then it's something they're doing. They got too much pressure or something else going on in their body.
So we're trying to teach a rotational game to people that can't rotate.
Exactly.
How's that working out?
Yeah, exactly.
How about the Squares golf shoes, Kevin? Do you have any ideas about those?
What golf shoes?
Squares do a lot of advertising, marketing. I think Faldo talks a lot about them. SQUAIRZ, something of that nature.
I actually don't know anything about them.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to put that on our list to find something out.
That's on the list.
Yeah,
List to look at.
that is it. Andy Lerch, we're going to get back to you on that. I'll write that down for you.
I mean, is that salted golf, you mean?
No, squares. It's a golf
Squares.
shoe.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah,
I
I
do
made
know.
a note and we'll talk about it.
Okay, definitely.
Yeah.
So
How about your
speaking
upper core, lower core?
upper
Larry
core,
Rinker. Are you familiar with Larry Rinker's upper core,
yeah,
lower core? I think he's
I'm
done a lot of work
that's
with
it.
David Wright.
That's the Dr. David Wright stuff. I've been through his system. There's look, there's obviously merit to everything. I don't
Sure.
pay too much attention to that. I've been through this system, and I'm actually considered an upper core player. I'm a little bit taller in the way that is. I don't want to get into it too much because I can't really talk about it that extensively. I think if that's something that's interesting to people, definitely look up Dr. David Wright. He's got great information, and I think the more tools that we have in our toolbox, the better the teacher that we are. But he would measure people. He actually had a system where he can measure people and tell you upper core, lower core, center core, and that'll affect kind of how you tend to come down. But Mike Adams is very involved with that too, and that's also related to a little bit with arms. With Mike, like for me, my arms, my wingspan is I'm 74 inches tall, and my wingspan is 77 inches. So I'm gonna typically have a little higher arm going back. Years ago, I won't say who it was, but I took a lesson from a top 100 teacher down in Florida, and he tried to get me to get much more over here and around, and I couldn't break 80 for a week. Actually, Debbie and Jim couldn't believe how badly I was hitting it, and it was just the opposite way that I was designed to swing, and that goes more along the lines of the Mike Adams, the Bioswing stuff. And had matching the way we're designed to work versus how we're swinging. Doesn't mean you can't change it. You can't override it. Like Matt Kuchar, his arms are very low, even though he's got long arms. You can override, especially if you're super talented. But for most golfers, I find when I do my assessment on them and I talk them through it, and they go up there like, oh yeah, that feels more normal to me, or that feels like how I used to swing. I find it's enhanced the way it enhanced the way that I teach. On the basis of my teaching, I learned from Jim McLean, and then learning from Mike Adams over the last 7 or 8 years has really enhanced the way that I analyze the body, and it really helps me get players a little bit, get better faster.
Which is teaching the person in front of you, right?
That's what you got to do. That's one of the things I've always learned is everyone's different, and everyone's going to walk out of here with something different.
Exactly. It's just there's no one solution for everyone, and there's nothing wrong with failing with your students to figure out what they need. That's what all good teachers have done and do on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think along those lines, in coaching with people and experimenting, I think that's okay for your average golfer. I think if you want to work with tour players or really accomplished players, you have to be really careful with experimenting because they're smart. They've tried a lot of different things, and you really can't experiment that much with a guy who's trying to play for a living, or a gal, someone. So you really got to know your stuff when you're working with those players. And there's a lot of, I find in the tour players that I've worked with and the really good section pros that are out there that I've worked with, there's a lot of back and forth. And knowing, I don't really experiment with them. It's you're going to do this. This is what's good for you, and we'll kind of go from there. We may have to pivot a little bit depending upon the feedback that we get, but you can't really experiment with someone that's got to go tee it up for some cash.
But you also have a much different person in front of you.
Yes, well, absolutely. You got a much different level of an athlete.
Yes,
but I just kind of wanted to point that out a little bit.
No, that's a good point. So from Tish here, if a student has a weak left side in general, having a hip replacement, left side hip replacement, gets incredibly swayed into the outside of the right foot in the backswing with a torque towards the right toe.
So weak left side, they kind of sway and go out.
Yeah, weak left side because there was a left hip replacement. So there might be some sensitivity to that. And then obviously because they're could be psychological, and not rotating. So they start swaying to the outside of the right foot. Not probably too dissimilar from your guy who was getting a little too far right this morning, but obviously not a probably an older player, obviously with the hip replacement, right?
Yep.
And then, so they get the outside of the right foot in the backswing and, you know, a little more toward the right toe.
So what I find with that is there's probably some scar tissue from the pain from being in the left hip for so many years that for them to turn put a lot of pressure on their hip. So they've just kind of, most people will shy away from pain, even though the hip's better. They're just used to going this way. So this is where you got to kind of retrain the body and the nervous system that it's not going to hurt the lead hip, the front hip, to start turning. Obviously, the easy answer is we'll get their left side stronger, but that's going to take some time. But I would just I would go narrow stance, toes out a little bit, give them a little range of motion. I'd put them on some kind of a balance platform so they can learn what it's like to balance. I go back to the core board and I kind of teach them toe and heel. One of the great things about, I'll put them on these discs. These are just inflatable pads. And for that player, since they're already unstable, I would just put one under the trail foot like this, and then just, you know, have them go back and have them keep the pressure in the middle of the foot. And because your right foot's higher, it's going to make it easier for the hip to get pushed back, and they get a sense when they go back, they get a sense, well, if I do that, that's what I'm going to presume the player's doing. They'll feel that even more with the pad under their foot. So if you just kind of have them go here and then just kind of learn to go back this way like that. And if it's still too unstable, you can actually get their feet where they're level. So you can, that's not going to put them level, but I've got another, I don't know if you can see me here, but I've got another mat here. So now my feet are the same height. So you can start out really easy that way. Use the pad for the instability so they can really feel where the toe's going, train them. Then you can go back up to here, make it a little bit more of a change, train them, and then take them off. And it typically carries over pretty quickly where all of a sudden they can feel their right foot better. These pads are something that I really love, these exercise pads, because most of us stand, you know, and we wear shoes all day. And I had a podiatrist tell me, Dr. Karen Harrison said, you know, your feet are like in casts all day and they lose their proprioception. And so when you put somebody on an unstable surface like this, you know, that you see them, they kind of wobble around and do whatever the first couple of times, and eventually they'll kind of get onto there where they can get stable. And then you can start doing backswings and learn how they can stabilize. You can see if they go on their toes or their heels and they learn to stabilize that way. Then when they jump off, they get back onto the ground. They really feel the ground quite differently. And then they start to learn changes. I would never have anybody do a downswing on the pads because there's too many accidents can happen. But doing some positions in the backswing and stuff like that with those pads are really easy, low-cost devices that are easy for people to train with and learn how to stabilize their bodies better.
Yes, and you know, and I do a lot of green reading, and so, you know, sensitivity in my feet. I use my feet to green read. And years ago, we brought in a therapist, and we got these little rollers, much like you know, have the foam rollers for your back and sides, glutes, you know, hips and what have you. But I have foam rollers for the feet that have little nodules on them. And I try to roll my feet every day because like you, Kevin, and like a lot of the people in this room that are teaching and on your feet all day in the golf shop, you just lose sensitivity. But I roll my feet and they feel so much better. And it makes my whole body feel better just by rolling my feet. So I try to do that every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, it's just like you mentioned, creating that sensitivity.
Yeah, and talking about feet and stuff, I want to bring in Andy Lerch. So, you know, having a studio with expensive equipment and all this stuff is great, but being able to measure pressure at home is would be really nice. And so I got introduced to salted golf by one of my students. I never really heard about it. And he said, God, we got this pressure system and these little insoles you put, and they measure pressure on your feet and they do vibration and audio feedback. And I'm like, well, that can't be that accurate because nothing that's that, you know, it was only, I think they're $220. Nothing that's that relatively inexpensive that measures that can't be that great. So called up Andy, he sent me a pair. And I measured them against my swing cat, and they were actually very accurate. So these are the insoles. This is what they look like, and they go right in your shoes, and they connect Bluetooth to your iPad or your iPhone. And so I wanted to, one of the things I think that's important for us to be able to offer people is something that's not too expensive, that gives you accurate data to measure and things that we can have our students practice with at home. So I want to bring Andy on to talk a little bit about them, and I'm gonna put these in my shoes and hook up my iPad, so there'll be a little bit of a flip over here, and we'll have Andy talk about the soles as I do that, and then I'll kind of show you how I use the insole. So I'm going to stop my screen share here. Andy, you can take over.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yes.
perfect.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Andy Lerch. Nice to meet you. So yeah, thanks, Kevin. It was an educational presentation there. I really enjoyed it. So I'm with a company called Salted, and we've recently launched a pressure tracing insole, as Kevin mentioned. So here you have what the insole looks like. And the way that it works, I guess just starting from the beginning, there's a battery, it's charged. It comes with a USB with 2 magnetic ports that are the charging mechanism. And underneath that tab is how you charge them. It just snaps into place. It takes about 2 hours to get a full charge. Once it's fully charged, you get about 7 hours of continuous use. The insoles themselves have 4 embedded pressure sensors in there that gives you real-time visibility to your pressure tracing. So you'll see your center of pressure, you'll see your left foot pressure, right foot pressure, and then heel toe as well, all in real time. As Kevin mentioned, they retail for $229. Not necessarily a product designed to replace a unit like a swing cat or a body track, but certainly could. We do sell a kit where you have one of every size. They come in 5 sizes. Within each size, there's about a 1 shoe size variance. So you can customize them, and along the toe. So if you find that your shoe size is a little bit on the smaller side for the insole, you can trim along the toe line and make it to size. But with the kit, you can take basically any size and use it. So if a student comes in and you want to throw them in an insole, you can grab the size, put it in, fire it up on your iPhone or iPad, and begin measuring their pressure tracing. What else? So yeah, there's 2 apps that we have. One is for golf that we're going to demonstrate and talk about today. The other is for training. So the training one gets more into walking, jogging, lifting weights, doing squats, lunges, in any other sport where you're on your feet, where foot pressure is critical. So you think about baseball or tennis, all those, but basically giving you real-time foot pressure visibility. So for the golf specific app, Kevin's going to be putting on a pair and kind of showing how it works, but there's a number of different features. You're able to video record a swing. Once you take that recording of the swing, it gets saved to a library. You can pull up your swing from that library, and it's a split screen. The top half is your golf swing, and the bottom half is the heat sensor schematic of your feet, kind of like what you saw with the swing catalyst. And
Andy,
it's
I'm
in
all
real
set.
time. Oh, you're all set. Okay.
Yep.
So we can.
Let me share my screen from my iPad here.
Okay.
Let me know if you can see that. Screen broadcast. Okay. You guys see that?
We can. I see a
Okay,
white screen. It
Yep.
looks like it's connecting.
You might.
Let me pull up Salted. So can you see Salted Golf now?
There it is. Yep.
Okay. So why don't you run me through it here? So I'll go to video, I'll go to analysis. Right? You want to go there, Andy?
Yep.
Okay.
Just click out of those.
Yeah, the app uploaded there. This is there. So there on the right side, if I can flip that around.
Want me to talk you through it?
Let me just switch the camera here. Whoop. I think it's got the wrong camera up. There we go. So now I get to see myself, right? And there's my feet. So why don't you talk through what people are seeing
Yep.
on there?
Okay. So he's in the record feature where you can record your swing. So you'll see this. Obviously, you'll see a video on the left side, which is Kevin swinging, and then on the right side, you're going to see his foot pressure between his left foot, his right foot, his heels, and his toes. So you'll see if you just stand still for 1 second. He's at 50-50 left-right. On his left foot, he has 56% on his heel, 41% on his toes. And so you can see on the side there where the different pressure measurements are. The white dot in the middle, that's his center of pressure. So that's the pressure tracing mechanism. And as you swing, you'll see, you want to take like a slow motion swing and see. So you can see the center of pressure moving from his left side over to his right side.
Right. So this is one of the features that I like about this for my students is they get to see what they're feeling right away. So I'll prescribe something for them to do, and then they can do this. Andy, let's go into the part where there's the feedback part, the biofeedback.
Okay. So click out of that, go to drill practice. So on the feedback area, the top right, that you'll see that little grape, turn that on. What is it that you want to work on specifically? How should we set it for you, Kevin?
Let's just leave it, back.
Leave it as is. Okay.
Let's just leave it as is.
So click start. So now what you see is it's established. He's established parameters. As long as he stays within that red box, his center of pressure, it will be quiet. But once you leave that red box, you'll get the biofeedback in the form of a beep that you'll hear.
Right.
So
now, what you can't, you can hear the beep, I think, but what you can't hear or what you can't see is they actually vibrate on your feet too. So when I go outside of that box right now, it beeps and it vibrates. That tells me that I've overdone what I'm working on.
Yeah, and if you're on a driving range and there's people around and you don't want to bother them, you can wear your earbuds, and then that beeping won't be. People will not hear it. So
right.
Basically, what you can do is establish any kind of parameter or target that you want, and practice accordingly. So you can play with this any way you want. So say, for instance, you want to try to get more weight on your left side or your left side heel at impact, your lead side. You can set that parameter. So say you want to get 70%, you can set it for 70. And when you're swinging, you can.
Right, so I go to 75, let's
say 75. So you've got that on your front foot. So basically when you achieve that, so say you want to get 75% on your lead foot at impact, you'll know you achieved it because it will beep. So it's a good way to practice and really get that biofeedback visibility that you're practicing what you want to be practicing. So I know a lot of times if I don't have that data or that feedback or visibility and I'm out practicing, I think I'm practicing something, but more often than not, I'm not. So right. This gives you that assurance. There's a lot of ways you can use this. I actually, for putting, I'll tighten that up really tight just to make sure that I've got a nice stable foundation, and just hit putts. And it's very difficult to do, but over time you'll get more and more centered and stable in your putting stroke. So
right.
You can move that around.
Also, as you can see, I can move it around if I want to, if I want to have, John, what do you like on the left side of the dress for putting? 60%?
Again, depending on the player and the height and so forth. But yeah, I would say that I favor a little more left just for stability purposes.
Yeah. So let's say so now I can set my feet there. So now if I get more than 70, so there, I want to be at 65 or 60. So now I kind of feel it. That's too much. They're very sensitive, as you can see. So here's 50, 50. And then I can go a little bit more. If I go more than 60, then it starts beeping at me. So that's where John wants me to be when I putt. So now when I putt, you can see it move just a little bit when I go my forward stroke there. So now I've learned So you can see how sensitive it is. I have my 7-iron here. I'm just kind of moving it back and forth, trying not to move my feet. And you can see how they move just a little bit there. So now I learned how not to use my legs in my putting stroke. Very stable. And the vibration and the audible was what really keyed in on it, because when I was doing it wrong, I'd move. Like, that was too much motion again. And now I'm able to do what John's asking me to do, and I get the immediate feedback. And that's what I like about these devices is, like I said, it's low cost, it's highly accurate, and there's a lot that you can do with it. Andy was telling me last night how you can actually start doing actual physical training. There's a training app that you can do so that you know you're doing exercises correctly, not being on your toes or your heels. So it's just, I just thought it was something that it's a great device that's really accurate, that we can offer to our students so they can learn to get a little bit better. It's not like you're asking them to spend a lot of money. And I think Andy has a special offer for us for the section. Is that correct?
Yeah. So they retail for $229.99, and what we offer for the PUD discount would be $160 plus shipping. So for about $175, you could have it delivered to you within a couple of days.
So for me, that's great. For as much as I spend on electronics, this is I can buy 10 of them and still save money.
You can pay for the other electronics. And one of the things I like about this is that you're getting immediate feedback. And I think that's so important when we're teaching, not only from my perspective as the instructor, but from the student's perspective. Okay, this is what you're feeling. Or like what Kevin just did is, if you have uneven weight distribution in putting, obviously it's gonna be in your stroke the same way as your full swing. And then Kevin Rodine asked earlier, as far as my green reading when I use my feet. I don't know what these would do, but that's one of the reasons I was very much interested in this. So I'm going to order these from Andy, and what I want to do is get out on those greens, and when I use my feet, what am I feeling? Different slopes, different pressures, because I think the more information that I'm able to integrate into my playing, obviously the better player I'm going to be, because I want this I want this information to flow. And when I can get this feedback and get people focused, because one of the great things about feedback is now they can be focused on something, because I always get, well, I'm not sure what I should practice, or I don't know that I'm practicing correctly. Well, with something like this, you do.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's,
and it's efficient for all areas of the game, isn't it, Kevin?
It's great for all areas of the game, full swing, short game, there's nothing that it can't do. Andy, if I'm not incorrect, you can actually wear them when you play.
Yep.
Because sometimes players are different on the course than when they are on the range. Plus, you get different lie angles, uphill, downhill, side. You get to see how the feet react. So there's almost nothing you really can't do with them. You can wear them. They're actually not. You have to take your footbeds out of your shoes. So that would be the only thing. But they're not uncomfortable to wear. They're durable. They charge pretty quickly. And then you have to have a kit for different sizes so you can accommodate as many people as you want. But I think it's just a great simple device that we can offer people. And like I said, I've got drawers full of devices that I've tried that are just I tried them and they weren't accurate, and I couldn't figure them out fast enough, and I don't have patience for that. I was able to charge up my Salted. I connected them right to my iPad, or actually you can do it to your iPhone, and they're ready to go, and it worked. But more importantly for me, when I measured it against my $25,000 Science in Motion plate here, not my Science in Motion, my Swing Cat plate, they were accurate to within a couple of percentage, which to me is really critical. It's great that it works, but it has to be accurate, and that's what we all want. We all want good data, and these provide really good data.
Yeah, and they do work with an Android. I just saw that question come through.
Okay, good.
So you don't need to get a damn iPhone, Tish. So they do work with Android. Just a few other things too. They come with a 1-year warranty, which is nice. They are waterproof, dustproof, so they are very well made. as Kevin mentioned, it's probably ideal to take out your other insoles because they would work, but it just gets a little bit tight having 2 insoles in your shoes. And then there's other, I don't know, Kevin, do you have any videos in your library? If you've taken any videos?
Let me see, because I think
Go to the swing library. If this is a new pair, you might not have them yet.
yeah, because it's updated. Let me
Because
see.
you
I
just
don't
got
think.
these. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Well, I thought it'd be neat to show the library if you wanted to record a swing, or I could just kind of talk about a few things in there.
Hey, Andy,
Yep.
just so everybody in the room knows, what's the best way for them to go about and order these from you? Is there a particular way you'd like us to do this?
3,
Yeah.
2,
So yeah,
1.
go directly to me.
Okay.
And I can we'll handle it offline. So if you guys want to share my contact information, they feel free to email or call me.
Yeah, I mean, if you just want to type in your email there or mobile, we'll be happy to take it.
Yep. Okay. Let me just go to
So
chat.
here's a swing.
So if you guys are doing this at 4 in the morning, just email them, don't call them.
Yeah. So here you can see it, the foot pressure, and the video is actually pretty good. I got the iPad a little bit too close to the cameras, but you can see where so now I've got some data to look at. I can control where the swing is. So where am I at address? I'm good at address. As I go back, I go into the outside of my right foot a little too much. You can see the trace. So it gives you really good data synced up with video, which is just makes it easier to learn a lot faster.
Yeah, and you're able to also get into swing analysis if you want. You can draw lines. I don't know, Kevin, if you can show them how you can draw lines. If you know, I can show you. Just so basically, well, here you can select positions and go through the swing. You can establish the address position, the top of the backswing, impact, and then finish. And it will shorten up the recording.
Impact and finish there.
And then, so go to the top right and hit that little down arrow. So now if you click the far right triangle on the bottom there, it'll go to just jump to each position.
Each position.
Yeah. So like I said, you can draw lines. There's also a comparison feature.
Yep.
So if you want to
compare, I only have one swing in there, so I only have one swing in there.
You can compare it to there's a library of pros too that you can pull in. They have a number of different pros that have different clubs down the line face on. So this one you're face on with a 7-iron. If you pull that in, all right, it's save. So now you can see, you can do comparisons.
She's much more flexible than I am. Not too dissimilar there. I get a little more to my right side, so you can see. So it's all great info.
So the neat feature too is if you're talking about having students come in, like Kevin had someone in this morning on the swing cat. Now that gentleman is probably gone for 2-3 weeks. Who knows how long before he comes back for another lesson? Well, if he wants to keep working on what he learned on the swing cat, he now has the technology where he can continue and continue developing his footwork and monitor it accordingly. And also there's a share capability in this as well. So you can take the videos out of your library. You can actually voice over record messages, and then you're able to text it or email it. So maybe a week goes by and he's been working on it. Hey, Kevin, check this out. I've been making some progress. I'm struggling with this. What do you think? Kevin will actually receive the video in an email or a text. He can play it, listen to it, and analyze remotely. So some nice virtual capability as well.
Yep.
Now, Andy, there's always a learning curve here for us. And because we like to know how to use a product fully before we obviously would want to break it out with student. Is there a library of training videos available with the product?
Yeah, so our website is mysalted.com. That's mysalted.com. And we continue to add content to the website. We're pretty new. We're about 4 months in, so it's going to get better. But we have a quick connect section that kind of shows you how to calibrate, which is very easy. How to connect, how to use the insoles. There's video instructions on how to use them. We have a number of reviews and instruction videos in there as well. And the next component that we're working on is education content. So, you're going to take it then to, all right, well, it's a cool product. It's accurate. It gives good technology, good data, but how does that help me improve my game? And it maybe not as important for someone that's working with Kevin on his swing cat and is being educated through Kevin, but there's a lot of people out there that don't have that access. So really educating them on drills and tendencies and what you should be working on. We'll be adding that content in there as well from instructors.
Yeah, what's great about this is you're getting a lot of technology for the money, which is something we all like because technology is expensive and there's a rate of return on investment. But when Kevin takes the student off the swing cat, he can also provide him that technology that he can go out and practice with and set his parameters and get his biofeedback, through audio or visual. And so that, it makes Kevin's lesson even better because the guy can, or the woman can repeat what they're doing.
Yeah. Take your student out on the course with you and start seeing what they're doing on the fifth tee box.
Exactly. So Andy, thank you so much for coming on, taking the time. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We're running a little bit long here. So, and I'm sure if there's any more questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is kevin@kevinsprecher.com. I'm happy to answer any questions. Feel free to call if you want to come up and come take a lesson. I'm happy to see anybody and kind of walk you through it. I'm here as a resource. Use me as a resource. I always like talking to people. I learn a lot from talking with everyone out there. And so just keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep let's have a great season this year.
Kevin, thank you very much. It was really a great presentation. It was everything we had hoped for and more. It was nice of you to incorporate Andy and share your time with us because this is the kind of professionalism we like to see with our seminars, and you did an outstanding job. So very much appreciated. And Andy, get my salted insoles ready because I need some.
All right. Thanks for having me.
John.